All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I love interrupting your conversations. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm just kidding. That wasn't very nice of me to say. But I'm glad that you're here, and I love the energy in the room. It's good stuff. I'm filling in this morning, and it actually worked out really well for me to be filling in this morning because today we're studying evidences for the resurrection, and that is exactly what I would have been teaching in the middle school class downstairs anyway. So I've just kind of pulled some old material that I had that I was planning to share with them, and I'm going to share it with you this morning, and hopefully it will be a blessing for all of us in terms of solidifying our faith and being able to answer some of the objections that come up to our faith. So as I said, we're going to be talking about the resurrection this morning, and that's going to be the topic today and next Sunday. And so I'm going to just kind of make one passing reference to next Sunday's topic in this regard. But what I really want to dig in on today is this whole idea about objections to the resurrection of Jesus, and especially also dig in on why it matters that we have a solid grip on our belief in the resurrection. So can I get a volunteer to start with a reading for us this morning? Can I get somebody to volunteer to go to 1 Corinthians 15? And I want to read verses 12 through 19 in one go. Anybody willing to do that? Tom, go for it. Thank you, sir. Okay, so based on what Paul says there, what is the placement of the resurrection in the grand scheme of the Christian faith? Pivot point. What was the other one? Somebody said it quietly. Central. It's absolutely central. Okay. All right. Among all the doctrines that are part of Christianity, in terms of morality, holiness, priesthood, redemption, forgiveness, repentance, the incarnation, the identity of Christ, among all the doctrines of Christianity, where is the resurrection going to be in the list when things are ranked by importance? Number one. It is going to be, number one. And especially when you think in terms of Christianity up against the other religions of the world, the single determining factor, the single uniqueness of Christianity above all other things that are unique about Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, there are other points where it's different from the other religions. Some of them are wildly different from the other religions, but the resurrection is the one that differentiates Christianity from all of the others. Okay? So, I just want to solidify in our minds that when we talk about this topic, it's one of those things, I think sometimes in the evangelical world, the resurrection is looked at as the nice topic for Easter Sunday. The nice topic for Easter Sunday is a nice topic for Easter Sunday. However, it is the core of our faith. Like, it's that important, you know? And so that's why it's so much more than just the way that it's typically approached in the evangelical world. It is the absolute core of our faith, to the point that Paul says that if the dead are not raised at all, then you're saying that Christ couldn't have been raised. And if Christ can't be raised, you're in your sins, and your entire pursuit of Christianity is a waste of time. Now, in those exact terms, it sounds pretty dramatic, doesn't it? And I think that's what Paul meant for it to do. It meant for it to sound dramatic to the Corinthians as well. And it needs to always sound that way to God's people, okay? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about Jesus, and I want to show you a couple of these are additional here because they were just, I think they're helpful. I want to start with some references to Jesus in history outside the Bible. One of them will point us to the resurrection. Then we'll dig in on the resurrection topic for a little while, for most of our class time. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with just a couple of other smaller evidences that point to how important this really is. So Jeff's going to lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll start working our way through the material.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this opportunity that you've given us to come together and study your word. Thank you for Dan and for the preparation that he's put into this class. Please be with us and help us to learn and to contribute to the class. Help us to grow in our understanding of your word and be able to teach to others. Please forgive us of our sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. So first, let me just show you a couple of quotes, and this is the kind of stuff that we just love to find this, because this is just really helpful to know that we're not just breaking into an otherwise real world with this whole Bible stuff. The Bible is part of the real world, okay? And the events of the Bible were part of the real world. So I know this may be a little bit on the difficult side to read depending on where you're sitting, but these are just a couple of quotes that I find to be really interesting that give credence to the existence of Jesus, and then the third one, even to his resurrection. So here's Tacitus. This is between 150 and 200 BC, I believe. And this is what he says in one of his writings. To suppress the rumor that Nero himself had started the Great Fire in Rome, he falsely charged with guilt and punished with the most exquisite tortures the persons commonly called Christians, who were hated for their enormities. Christus, Christ, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. Now, this is an interesting quote because for a long time there was this objection to Christianity that there was never such a person as Pontius Pilate. We have no record of him at all. He doesn't show up in any Roman government official records or anything like that. You Christians are just making him up. The Bible made him up. And then he turned up in the writings of Tacitus. Okay? And not only did he turn up in the writings of Tacitus, he turned up in exactly the role that the Bible says he had. So there's an evidence there to just the existence of Christianity, the existence of Christ in the first couple of centuries. It was a very early realization. Okay, another one here from Lucian, again around the same time period, 100 to 200 AD. The man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Obviously, Lucian doesn't believe in Christianity, but he knows about the idea. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they were all brothers one of another after they have transgressed once for all by denying the Greek gods and by worshiping that crucified sophist himself and living under his laws. Now, can you see that what you're getting here is an enemy of the faith perfectly describing the faith? That's really cool, isn't it? And who is the core figure as they understand it, as they look at the Christian movement in the first couple of centuries? Who is the core figure of that movement? It has to be Christ, you know. It's just interesting to me. They do go on to write, I should be clear about that. They do go on to write in other contexts about the strange behaviors they see in these Christians, about their assembly practices, about the other activities that they do as part of worshiping this man that they call Christus, okay? But everybody who knows about the Christians early on, the thing they know about them is the centrality of this man called Christ. It's not so much about their moral behaviors and their family life and all that kind of stuff and their worship practices. It's about this man that these people will not stop talking about, that they claim is their master to this day. It's really cool, okay? All right, and then here's the third one. This is from Josephus. That'll be a name that you inevitably recognize more. This is Josephus. He died around 100 AD, so he was a Jewish historian, and he was basically just writing the history of the Jewish people sometime between the resurrection of Jesus and the end of the first century. Josephus, I think, was born around 35 AD, and Christ obviously was resurrected around 33 AD, and so he's writing the entire history of the Jewish people, and he's trying to get it all into one big writing project, but he feels compelled to make mention of this. At this time, there was a wise man called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. Many people among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. First of all, I think it's funny that he has to distinguish the two things. He appeared to them and he was actually alive. It kind of makes sense. He's telling us it wasn't a hallucination. These people didn't claim that they saw a vision of Jesus. They saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion. That's important, okay? Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have reported wonders, and the tribe of the Christians so named after him has not disappeared to this day. Somewhere in the 90s AD, okay? Now, this is just really interesting, but here's what I think is the most interesting part of it is right here. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. So this is, even then, again, this is Josephus. He is not a Christian. He's a Jew. But he notices a significant enough trend among the Jewish people that he feels compelled to write about it in his history to say, this seems like it's going somewhere. Like, this is essentially current events, but it seems like it's going to have historical impact. And so he writes about this claim that they believed in this man whom they thought had risen from the dead. Okay? So all of those are just historical references to point us forward to talking about this and to know why this is so important. Okay? So let's explore a little bit of the concept that I introduced just a second ago, the importance of the resurrection. Okay. Name them off for me. Let's do a little poll pop quiz type thing here. The world religions that their faith system depends on a person. Like, it rests specifically on an individual. Name them off for me, the world religious systems that rest on a person. Okay, Buddha. Yep, Muhammad. Yep, Joseph Smith. Didn't make the list here, but you are right about that. Okay. That one gets messy. Okay. Sorry, it does. All right, Catholics, I'm going to just kind of lump it in with Christianity for just a moment, in only this way that they do believe in Jesus. They're wrong about a lot of things they believe about him, but they do believe that he is the central figure, and I will give them at least that much credit. No more than that. Don't misquote me, but I will give them at least that much credit. Okay? All right, what else? How about Judaism? Who does it depend on? Moses or Abraham, right? I would call it an Abrahamic religion, that it goes back to their identity with him. Okay, so this is what's interesting about it. There are essentially 4 world religions that stand or fall on a person, okay? The Joseph Smith thing is a little bit too weird to have made this list. It has a different flavor to it, and it's a whole different discussion. But here they are: Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, and Christianity. They rise, each of those rises or falls on the central figure of the religion. Now, out of the 4, which religion claims for itself that founder beat death? Yeah, and this is one of those things, y'all. It is only Christianity. And again, this is why I say this is the unique thing about Christianity. Like, technically, the word unique cannot be modified to be made stronger because it is an absolute word. If a thing is unique, it is unique. But in this case, I'm going to say this is what makes Christianity truly, absolutely unique from the other world religions. Because they don't even claim for themselves that their founder had the ability to beat death. But Christianity does make that claim, and it is actually the central claim of the entire Christian faith because it's part of the identity of Jesus, okay? And so this is what's interesting to me about this whole thing and why this is so important. One apologetics writer and commentator that I was listening to recently said this, that if that message, the message of the resurrection, is true, then Christianity is true, whatever the other objections are. Okay, so I assume anyway, I haven't listened to all the classes. I've listened to a few of them that Rod's been teaching this quarter, but I'm assuming that you've discussed some of the other objections to Christianity, right? Some of the things that people throw at it as a possible thing to undo Christianity or to discredit it. So what would some of those be? We talk about objections right there, other objections other than the resurrection. What are some of the things that are thrown at our faith as reasons to not believe in it? Dad?
One is that it's too narrow of a view.
Okay.
It's too exclusive.
Okay, gotcha. So the question about that is, did Jesus die and was he raised again?
Yes.
All right, well then, if the view is too narrow, Christianity is still Christianity because Jesus died and rose again. Right? Okay, what are some of the other objections? Okay, the Bible can't be trusted. Now, the question about that one is, let me ask you a very specific question about the Bible. Can it be trusted when it says that Jesus died and that he rose from the dead? Yes. And so Christianity is true, and we have to figure out the rest of that, right? But it's still true because of the resurrection. You understand? What are some of the other ones? They usually get just more specific versions of what Derek just said right there. There's discrepancies in the Gospels. There's transmission errors from the old versions to the current versions, all that kind of stuff, right? But the bottom line is, if you start looking at the other objections that are raised, what about the discrepancies in the Gospels? What about the contradictions that are present in the Gospels? How did Judas die? There's two different versions. Which one do we believe? What about why Joshua was commanded to kill innocent people? What about the moral struggles of the whole thing? What about the narrow view of the whole thing? What about all this different stuff? All of that can be wrestled with, but none of that is going to be strong enough to overthrow the Christian faith itself if the resurrection still stands. It all rides on that, because if he rose from the dead, then he is who he claimed to be. And the rest of that, we're just going to have to wrestle it out and figure it out, but that stays true. And that's the thing that makes this discussion so incredibly important. Ashley, what'd you have?
I was just going to say, I've heard some objections as of late where people say that Christianity is a counterfeit religion of some of the pagan ones from like ancient times.
Uh-huh.
Point to like the fact that some people think that Jesus' birthday was December 25th, and those sorts of things, to say that the entire thing is a counterfeit religion and that we're just copying from those older versions. I don't know if anybody else has heard that.
Only a little. I don't know if anybody else has heard this either, but I have run into it a little bit. And again, though, I go to the resurrection.
Yeah, that is where the proof is in the pudding, because none
Yeah.
of the older ones have that.
No. And by the way, is it weird to anybody else that even in conjuring up religious thought and conjuring up religious systems, mankind has never thought to invent a resurrection, even after one already happened? Nobody thinks to put that in the story when they're inventing a new religion. It's too far-fetched, y'all. But it happened, and that's a big part of the evidence for this being true. This entire system of faith that depends on that, that's a big part of the evidence of this being true. Because it's just too far-fetched for us to have come up with it. The truth is stranger than the truth is stranger than fiction, yeah? And that's where we're at with the resurrection. It's strange. It's weird. It's weird enough that we don't try to even duplicate it. We don't try to plagiarize it. But it happened, and the evidence points to that, okay? So anyway, so this is where we're going. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we believe that this happened and the evidence that actually points to it, okay? Yes.
Before we go on to those specifics, regarding what's been said about ancient religions and all of that sort of thing, you're right. The resurrection sets it apart. And the speech that Paul made in Athens,
Yep.
the thing that made his preaching different was, even to the ancient religions recognized by the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, was he preached a Jesus that was raised from the dead.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Yeah. Well, so that is a fascinating context because they followed with him, right? When Paul started talking in the Areopagus, the philosophers of the Greeks, who were arguably the inventors of like philosophy as we know it today, they tracked with him all the way through his speech until the exact point where he said, And God gave testimony to the truth of what he was doing by raising Jesus from the dead. And they all went, okay, you've lost your mind. We're out of here, right? That was the breaking point, because the truth is stranger than fiction. But the truth is the truth, and that's where it comes from. Dad, what were you going to say? Was it you? Somebody else had a hand.
I was pointing to you.
Oh, okay. That was very kind of you. Thanks. Okay. All right. So, yeah, that's Acts 17. If you're taking notes, you can put that in your margin there. That's Acts 17 where Paul talks with them. And it does. It hinges on the resurrection. Also, okay, pause on this thought one more time because it just occurred to me. I'm glad you brought that up, Mickey. It is also interesting to me that at the moment that Paul mentions the resurrection of the dead, some of the philosophers think that Paul is talking about other gods, because they don't have a concept in their framework of the gods of bringing someone back to life. Like, even in their concept of all that their gods can do, they don't have that concept. They don't have a framework for that. And so when he says, this God brought someone back from the dead, they go, that is a completely other system of gods and religions and stuff we've never heard of. And some of them were curious, some of them were turned off, but either way, it was the breaking point, was on this one topic. Okay? All right, so let's get down to a little bit of why we believe that it happened and some of the evidences for it. All right, let's start with the empty tomb on that particular Sunday morning. The empty tomb is one of those things that is undeniable. Okay, the history is there in the Bible, and it is verified by enough people who knew enough of the people that were there on that Sunday morning to just know that the tomb was empty that Sunday morning. Okay, there are too many things in favor of it being empty to make any sort of reasonable claim that no, Jesus was still there and they all just started making up the story. That doesn't work. Okay, so here are some of the claims, or here are some of the evidences for the fact that the tomb was empty. Jesus' body was there on Friday, it was gone on Sunday morning, and there were people who could verify that. The women, the angels, the disciples, and the soldiers all had something to say about that. That's in your Bible. That's in the history section of your New Testament, okay, in the Gospels. So the question is, if the body is gone on that Sunday morning, then what are the options to explain its disappearance? Number one, that he rose. Let's get rid of that one and table it for a second. What are the other possible options to explain where it went? What'd you say, Gary? Yeah, somebody stole the body. Okay, all right, that's one. Okay, another?
The swoon theory.
Yeah, good. That's the next slide. Yeah, he was never truly dead. He was unconscious and he appeared dead, but then when they left him alone long enough in the tomb, he woke up and he was able to free himself from behind the 4,000-pound rock that was rolled in front of the tomb, and he went free. Okay, there's that one, the swoon theory. Okay, Miss Martha.
How could they possibly think that he was alive? Oh, but he had suffered and the people had seen him.
Oh, yeah.
Sword in the side, there's blood flowing.
Yep.
How could they think he was still alive?
Absolutely. That is the crucial problem with that theory. Okay, what's another option for what happened to the body? Yeah. So the stolen body theory has two connection points. Either the disciples overpowered the soldiers during Saturday and they stole the body, or they overpowered the soldiers as the whole, or they stole his body in conspiracy with Joseph of Arimathea, and he was never there in the first place. Yeah? No, doesn't work. Okay. So that's the thing about it. Here's what we have, okay, and here's what I want to do is I want to just kind of walk through some of these objections and talk about what's wrong with each one, because ultimately what we're doing here is a process of elimination. If we've got this possibility, this one, and this one for what happened to the body, and none of them work, we're only left with the resurrection as the reality, okay? And so that's what we're trying to shoot for right here. So here's the first one. Emily mentioned it. It is the swoon theory, the first objection to the resurrection being true. And basically what it says is that Jesus never died. He fainted somewhere in the process of all of the things that happened to him. He was overwhelmed. It left him completely unconscious and completely appearing to be dead, but he wasn't actually dead, only mostly dead. Princess Bride, you're welcome. And so then he came back to life sometime over the course of Saturday, and Sunday morning was able to free himself, okay? The problems with this, Miss Martha was really getting to one of them. There's two different versions of this, I guess. Okay, this one is interesting, that he was drugged on the cross and he awoke in the tomb. I'm not going to deal with that one directly so much, but the problems with this are big problems. Problem number one is the device that the Bible calls the scourge. You've heard, I'm sure, all the different descriptions of how incredibly fierce this weapon was. The punishment that it would inflict on the body was enough that it often killed people before they went to their capital punishment. And so lots of people just did not survive this thing. This would shred all sorts of tissue. It would leave the victim very nearly unable to breathe. There's all sorts of things that just going through that is going to leave any human body completely unable to extricate itself from a stone tomb the next day or 2 days later, you know. There's just entirely too much damage that would be done by this thing for any human to have the strength to do anything about that. Yeah, Austin?
And most of those humans only got so many of them. So many
Yes.
lashes. He got the most
Yeah.
lashes from it. So that puts it into perspective.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. The second problem with this is the cross itself. I'm not one for like medical details. I've just never been one to retain that kind of stuff, but I have heard it read many, many times in my life at communion, the like medical breakdown of what crucifixion, the Roman way, would do to the body and how it was handled, and the incredible amounts of pain and damage to the body that were done through that. And it number one, it boggles the mind. It boggles the mind that it took even as long as it did for Jesus to die. Okay, and I know he was the first one to go, you know. It boggles the mind that he lasted even that long in that physical condition. But number two, it boggles the mind that humans ever came up with anything so torturous and awful. Okay? Now that said, Jesus went through all of it, and he underwent all of it at the hands of a group of Roman soldiers who probably did this on a somewhat regular basis, who know what death looks like. This is not a group of guys that they're going to be tricked easily and go, I don't know, he's probably dead, and 3 days later they go, man, we did it again. We let another one live. It's not like that, you know. This is the kind of thing where when they crucify someone, the deed is done. You know, to the point that they're coming along later and breaking the legs of these other guys to speed up the dying process. They know how to get this done, okay? And so what's that? Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we find that later in the story in Matthew. Yeah. So that's problem number two with this theory, is it just doesn't leave the door open for him to have survived. The cross itself and everything that went with it doesn't leave the door open for that. And then problem number three, as I said, is the tomb. I mentioned this a little while ago. When you look at these tombs, they were carved into the hillside and also out of the hillside. So like the stone workers would take to it with chisels, and they would carve that big rock and the trench and the cave, everything that you see right there, all out of that single slab of rock that was the hillside. And those rocks were meant to stay in place. So like the trench that you see kind of right here, the little track, think Indiana Jones. This thing is sloped, and so when you pull the stopper out and you let that big rock go down, it's an enormous, like, body-crushing piece of weight that rolls down and sits and stays right there. Not only that, Jesus's was sealed, okay? So it is going to stay. And what you're trying to tell me, what somebody's trying to tell us in this theory is, yeah, well, Jesus, you know, he underwent all that torture and all that agony and all that damage to his body, but Sunday morning when he woke up, he still had the strength to roll that thing uphill out of the way and get out of there. It just doesn't work, okay? And so when we look at this theory, it just doesn't hold water. Okay, now the next one, this is common to talk about as well, is the wrong tomb theory. This is the one that nobody brought up because, I think, it just doesn't even really make sense to us. But basically what it comes down to is the belief that in the early morning, pre-dawn hours, somebody got lost. They went to the wrong tomb. They actually went to an empty tomb, not the one that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. And they saw that it was empty, and they went, oh, he rose from the dead. Let's go tell everybody we know. And the rumor caught on, and it's still a religion today. That's the theory. Here are the problems with it, okay? When you just think through the history of what happened. Number one, there were multiple people who visited this site at multiple times that same day. Did all of them get it wrong in daylight and the pre-dawn darkness? Did everybody get it wrong and nobody seemed to compare the story and figure all that out? It's pretty easy, I think, if this far-fetched thing has happened, so far-fetched that we never even invented an idea like this, and now we want to go find out if it really happened. It's pretty easy for everybody to say, okay, look, everybody who went there today, let's all go at the same time to the same place. And someone will know, hey, wait a minute, guys, this wasn't where that happened. Right? Somebody's going to know the difference there. Problem number two is that there were angels at the tomb. And so the question is, did they go to the wrong one as well? No, they didn't. Problem number three is that Jesus' tomb was actually marked. So take a look at this. Look at Matthew 27. Let's look at that reference that's mentioned there. The chief priest, no, that's the wrong reference. Hang on. What am I looking for? I do this all the time. I get my keystrokes off by one. It'll be like 27:16 or 28:6 or whatever it was. Bummer. I don't remember. I'm sorry. All right. What is it in 28:6 that's the giveaway?
He is not here, for he is risen, even as he said, come see the place where the Lord lay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why I would have put that with his being marked in some particular way. I don't know. You can ignore that one for your note taking. Number four is that the chief priests really wanted Jesus to be dead, right? They are highly motivated in this story to have him dead and have him stay dead. So if you were there in their shoes, if you're highly motivated to have this man Jesus not be alive anymore, and all of a sudden somebody's claiming, no, he's alive, we went to the tomb and it's empty. If they went to the wrong tomb, what is the only thing you have to do to discredit their story? Go to the right one. It's that simple. But they don't. Did you find it? What is it? 2760?
Yeah. It says, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut into the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the entrance. So it's something that Joseph of Arimathea made himself.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha. That probably is what I meant to have right there. So there you go. 2760. Thank you very much. Okay. So yeah, if you're highly motivated to have him dead, and someone claims he's no longer dead, all you got to do is go show the body. But they don't. So where is it? And the answer is, it's gone. It's not there. And so this wrong tomb theory just doesn't work. Okay, and then lastly, here's the other one, the stolen body theory, the first one you brought up. The theory is that the disciples came at one point in the story or another, and they took the body of Jesus. Okay, so the problems with this one are, number one, that we were told from the very beginning, we're told still in the narrative that that would be claimed and that it was a made-up thing. Okay, so take a look at chapter 28. If you're in 2760, let's just go down the page. Start reading in verse, let's start reading in verse 11. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we'll satisfy him and keep you soldiers out of trouble. So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day, at least to the day that Matthew was writing this down. So this is what's interesting to me about this is if we're still sticking to the story that the disciples stole the body, we're missing the fact that from the very beginning, we had somebody who said, listen, we already know how that story got started. This is where that came from. It came from the Jewish people trying to cover their tracks, from the chief priests trying to cover their tracks and the soldiers' tracks. It came from the fact that he actually rose from the dead, and they were trying to hide that, okay? And then the second problem with this stolen body theory is that the disciples seriously just couldn't pull this off. There's just no way. When you look at the stone itself, again, this thing is probably in the neighborhood of 4,000 pounds. When you look at the fact that the guard around the tomb was between 4 and 16 Roman soldiers, these are men who are trained in combat and trained at guard duty, it's just not going to work. And then when you look at the fact that later on in their lives, they were willing to die for believing and saying that Jesus rose from the dead, it doesn't make sense that they would be the ones who faked his rising from the dead. Now, that's the topic for next week, so I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I just do want to make sure that I'm explaining it clearly here. If the people who committed a hoax were going to be given the death penalty for the hoax, would they die for that hoax?
Probably not all of them.
I mean, maybe a crazy person in the bunch, okay? But no, not all of them. And that's what's really fascinating about this, is how did the apostles, how did their lives come to an end? I was going to say, as far as we know, it's only John who dies a natural death at old age. Everybody else dies for this claim. And why would they die for this claim if they knew they faked this claim and it's going to cost them their lives? Makes no sense. Derek, what you got? Yep.
So he's going to, within that period of time, carrying out Jesus' dead body, then decide, right? It just doesn't.
It does not add up, no. And especially if you look at the times when, just take Peter for the specific example. Look at this. Look at the book of Acts, and look at how Peter gets treated through the book of Acts for teaching the resurrection. Like, he would have given up at some point in there, you know. And I'm assuming that he's enough like me that he would have given up because he's human, okay? But he doesn't. And he doesn't give up to the bitter end of his life. Mickey, what'd you have?
Just a thought regarding the prophecies. All of these things are good to explain that he was raised from the dead. These theories are in vain. But after Jesus was raised from the dead, he was with the disciples, and he professed unto them the testimony of the prophets.
Yep.
And said, all things has to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Concerning me, my death and the resurrection.
Yes.
How do we explain the fact that he was raised from the dead in view of these theories, comparing it with prophecies that are 1,000 years old?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Specific prophecies.
Well, okay. So now here's my question, though. This is a bit of a banter with. Okay, so hope this works. That's what I'm trying to stage. We'll see if it goes well. What specific prophecy in the Old Testament says that the Messiah would die and be resurrected from the dead 3 days later?
Jesus cited the example of Jonah.
Okay. All right. True, obviously, because Jesus said it. But, but does it say the Messiah will be just like this prophet? Not in Jonah. Not anybody writing about Jonah until Jesus. This is interesting to me because Mickey's onto something really big right there. Jesus does point to the fact, and you see this in Luke 24. This is this wonderful passage where he's walking along the road to the village of Emmaus. And he's got these two disciples with him, and they're chatting, and they ask him, hey, are you the only one in the whole city of Jerusalem who didn't hear about this guy and all the craziness of them putting him to death on Friday? And Jesus says, well, doesn't it kind of make sense that if he was your Messiah, they would have put him to death? And it kind of makes sense that he would have risen from the dead this morning. And what it specifically says is, Jesus explained to them from the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, the writings, which is the entire Old Testament, how the Christ was supposed to rise from the dead. Okay? This is really fascinating to me, that there is no specific prophecy in the Old Testament that says the Messiah will rise from the dead, but there are so many stories where somebody was as good as dead, or some group was as good as dead for 3 days, and then God miraculously brought them back. You think about Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac. You think about Esther when she's going to go in before King Xerxes. You think about Jonah in the belly of the great sea creature. There's all these different places where there's a 3-day period or a 3-week or a 3-month or a 3-year period where God lets death seem like it reigns, and then resurrection and renewal happens. And Jesus is telling them, hey, y'all know all those stories. You know all those prophecies. Doesn't it make sense that even if Messiah did die on Friday, he would have come back from the dead today? And then later on, they have that aha moment and they go, yes, it does. The prophecies are fulfilled in this guy, you know? And so Mickey's point is excellently made right there, that it all points to this. And so anyway, here's what I hope that you take away from today. I'm out of time, but here's what I hope that you take away from today. The theories about what could have happened to lead to the empty tomb, none of them hold water except for the resurrection actually happening. And I go back to the way that Josephus described it as the claim of his people, the claim of Jesus' people during Josephus' day. They claimed that he had appeared to them after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Josephus claimed those two truths, and it's so crucially important to our faith. It is the pivot point of our faith to believe those same two things, that he appeared, and he appeared because he was actually alive. That's the only explanation of the empty tomb that actually makes sense. All right, thank you very much for your good attention today. I appreciate it very, very much.